right, so this is week 5 of the Striker Fired course. This is the last assignment for this course, and we're really just going over some trigger stuff. A lot of the material that I'm going to be showing in the video is probably going to be time-lapse, but it's actually not required in the assignment, but I like you guys, so I'm going to include it in the video for you to see. And this is probably the only dialogue I'll be doing in the shop because we got some wild weather today, so this is probably the only time that it'll be quiet enough for me to talk, because when it rains here, it rains hard, and it usually hails too. And this is a metal building, so it's freaking loud. There's also a chance for tornadoes, so if I disappear and you never hear from me again, then you'll know where I went.
The suck zone.
But what's new, right? It's just typical April weather in Abilene, Texas. So yeah, without further ado, I'm just gonna hop into it. All right, so starting with the trigger feel, assessing with the trigger feel. First thing I can notice right off the bat is that the Dagger had, you know, your typical spongy Glock grimy trigger. Those of you who have shot Glock as well as other fire or other pistols, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. It's really just all of the downsides of a stock Glock trigger, but magnified, as you would expect for, you know, a budget Glock. I think the biggest noticeable thing with the Dagger was the take-up wasn't that bad. It was more of the brake. So the brake was very, or creep, if you want to get technical with it. The creep on Glock platforms is always going to be a little weird because when the gun's in battery, it's not actually at full cock yet. It gets into full cock when you pull the trigger. So that creep is you pulling the striker back farther and then it braking. So that sear on the back of the cruciform on the trigger bar is going to be pushing that sear back and simultaneously sliding off of that lug of the striker. And in this gun, you could feel that big time. So after that, it was time to move on and get an idea of what the trigger pull weight was. And evidently, it wasn't too terrible. It was around the 4.5 to 5 pound range. So at least at that point, we had a baseline to work with. Next up was applying the blue assembly fluid, or the layout dye actually. So moving on from that, it was time to apply the layout dye to the interacting parts of the trigger mechanism. Now, when I did this, I should have brushed up on the lecture material because I just went kind of ham with the layout dye, which isn't really hurting the project by any means, but it's just putting a lot more than what's necessary. I was still able to see the rub marks where it mattered, so essentially I just kind of made an unnecessary mess doing it. After examining the wear marks on the layout dye after cycling the firearm at least 10 times, it really came down to the sear surface, obviously, your striker lug, which interacts with the sear surface. On the back of the trigger bar, next to the cruciform, is the connector interaction point. I think it's what it's called. It's going to be a part of the trigger bar that slides alongside the connector. And then obviously you have your connector itself, as well as a few other parts that weren't mentioned in the lecture, but on the slide itself. I also found some wear marks on the striker safety plunger, I think is what it's called. I decided I was going to polish that one as well. Now, essentially the process for this is stoning it first with the fine stones. If you've watched my revolver videos from the last class, you'll see me using those fine stones for the first time. And basically, you're just taking these stones to those surfaces that rub, and you're deburring them and removing the machining marks, but you're not taking material off necessarily. You don't want to change the dimensions or the shape of these parts. You're just making them cleaner, basically. Only then you can move on to actually applying the polish to a Dremel and polishing those parts, trying to get kind of like that mirror finish, or at least a high shine at the very least. Now, as far as the trigger feel after just the stoning and polishing, it was almost like a night and day difference. It started to feel a lot like my Glock 19X that came stock with an aftermarket trigger. Not an aftermarket trigger, but like a Glock enhanced trigger. And like I said earlier, the big thing that I was really looking for was a change in the creep when you're trying to break that sear. And the stoning and polishing was able to get that griminess out of that step of, you know, the firing steps. The take-up wasn't bad to begin with, so I didn't really do anything to the trigger shoe itself. And then the brake was actually a little bit cleaner as well. I think this could have been due to a few of the burrs that may have been on the striker lug, just from manufacturing or use, first like break-in use, I guess. I'm not sure what it was from, but the creep and the brake are both a lot cleaner. There's still a lot of over travel after the brake, spongy over travel, but we'll get into that. I took it upon myself to polish the feed rail for the slide, mainly because when you have a full magazine, especially if it's topped off, you're gonna have a lot of resistance and pressure from the top round pressing up on the slide. So I want that surface to be really smooth. And I also took it upon myself to polish the metal housing that goes around the trigger mechanism housing, because the end of the trigger bar interacts with that part right in between that and the connector. So there's a lot of friction there. I just wanted to minimize the amount of friction by polishing those parts. So after just the polishing, I already mentioned that the trigger feel was already much better. Now, as far as the trigger pull weight goes, I didn't expect it to drop at all, which it didn't really. It dropped maybe 1/10 to maybe 2/10 of a pound. So I was averaging like 4.4, 4.5, which is as expected. So with the polishing, we're really focusing on trying to get the feel better, which in my opinion is the more important part of a trigger group anyways, is the way it feels. So moving on to the next part of the assignment, SDI sent us these competition spring kits as well as a aftermarket connector, and I decided to do the connector first because I knew that was going to take a little bit more work, a little bit more elbow grease. Now, in order to install the connector, you have to have a Glock Armor's back plate. I think it's called a half side cover plate, I'm pretty sure. They're pretty cheap. I think they're like between $5 to $10 or something, but this is because when you're testing out that aftermarket connector, before it's fit and tuned to your frame, you won't be able to get that trigger to break with the slide on. Therefore, you won't be able to get the sear to release the striker lug and get the slide off. So you have to be able to reach in there with the punch and pull or push the trigger bar down at the cruciform to release the slide. Now, when tuning the aftermarket connector, I had to take off about, I think it was about a 1/16, give or take, of the surface, that front surface of the connector. This part that you're trimming is technically, I think it's called the connector stop, if I remember correctly. And the idea is that you're tuning it to where you're reducing the amount of over travel after the trigger breaks. That's another thing that Glocks are notorious for, is having that over travel after the break. So it's a lot of assembling the firearm and disassembling it, taking material off, assembling it again, just going over and over again. I think I had to reassemble the gun about four times, I think, before I got it right. Next up was the aftermarket striker spring. Now, this kit came with a series of springs from 2 pounds all the way up to 6 pounds, which I think would maybe be stock, but I went with the 3 pound just to be safe. 2 pounds is kind of sketchy to me, and this one's pretty straightforward. You're really just pulling the old spring back and taking those cups out, those retaining cups out, and putting the new spring on and putting them back on. Next up was the trigger spring. So this trigger spring is actually has a little bit increased tension to help the trigger reset faster and with more force. And then finally, I put in the striker safety lug spring, probably the smallest spring in the gun. And this spring has a little bit less resistance, so therefore that notch on the top of the trigger bar can slide past that lug a little easier while still actuating it. Now, when testing out these new aftermarket components, the gun felt so good to cycle and dry fire that it was kind of sketchy. Now in the video, you can see me doing like a little drop test, testing the drop safety and whatnot with the hammer, and it didn't break free of the sear, so that's good. It already had a very positive sear engagement to begin with. That was one of the things I noticed when we did the layout die, was that the sear to striker lug engagement was very positive. If I was feeling a little extra confident, I probably could have altered the angle of the sear a little bit to slide a little easier, but I'm not a super professional yet. I wouldn't call myself a professional, so I'm not going to trust myself with something of that nature. I moved on to the final trigger pull weight test, and the results were pretty dope. So the striker spring that I installed was advertised as a 3 pound spring, and I ended up getting around 2.8 pounds on the trigger pull, which is wild. So from the start of the video, we had a grimy, heavy trigger. Well, it wasn't super heavy, it was just kind of grimy, kind of nasty. The trigger feel was off, completely off. By the end of the video, we got a new striker spring, a new trigger spring, a new striker safety lug spring. That one always trips me up. We also have some polished components, and it's like night and day. It almost feels as good as my Shadow Systems. The trigger pull weight is definitely lighter than the Shadow Systems, because that one's a 4 pound trigger pull, which is like the industry standard, safety standard, I guess. I wouldn't conceal carry a gun with this light of a trigger pull, but the feel is, it's there. It's honestly kind of like sketchy how light that trigger is. I didn't know a dagger could feel this nice. I think the only modification that I would do further with this gun is probably that sear surface angle, just because I kind of want to see how it would look with a neutral sear engagement instead of a positive one. But that's one of those things that, you know, I gotta do it perfect, because if I don't do it perfect, it's gonna make it unsafe or it's just gonna mess it up completely. So we'll see. But before I end the video, for a little bonus with you guys, I was liking this dagger so much that I actually put a flared magwell on it. I got a little short video I'm gonna post for you guys. It's nothing much, it's just ain't nothing but a thing, but I love flared magwells on guns, so yeah. Things starting to look pretty sick. But that's all I got for you guys today, and that's a wrap for the striker fired course with the Sonoran Desert Institute. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.